forgot about this scene. It worked out in Twilight. Oh my gosh. Just this book is just so crazy. This is why it's a horror novel, because it's pretty like graphic, I guess. Just let it. I can't even. That chapter was insane. And if you've read it, you probably know what I'm talking about. Hello everyone. I am here with another video, and in this one I want to talk about a book that Daniel and I read together, and it was The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. That one is always such a mouthful. I think this is like one of the longest book titles that I have, of a book I've read at least. And I always fumble it when I'm trying to say it out loud. So I'm sure I'll probably do that in this video. Anyway, so Daniel and I read this together. I think we started in August, maybe August or September, but it was a while ago. And my goal was to finish it by Halloween, which I think we ended up doing. I think we did finish it by Halloween. So I hope that you have read this, because if you have not, I might be giving away spoilers. Well, I probably will give away spoilers because I tabbed a lot and I kind of want to go through the book and talk about some of the places that I tabbed, because why not? So if you haven't read this yet, maybe don't watch the rest of this video and you can come back to it after you've read it. It is a very good book. I think you will enjoy it. I got through it pretty fast. If you don't like horror novels, there's not like a lot of scary parts in this. Like, it wasn't a scary book. It is, you know, vampire related, and there's one chapter you might want to skip if you are afraid of creepy crawlies. So yeah, I will talk about that later, because that's probably the scene I remember the most in this book. And if you've read it, you probably know what I'm talking about. We actually have 2 copies of this book because Daniel bought it for me at Target. This copy, he bought it for me at Target one time. And I was like really excited because I was like, oh, I really want to read this book. And then I think it was about a month later, for our anniversary, he got me this book again. So I opened it. I was like, oh, oh, wait. I was like, did you just buy this for me? And like, I went into my library here and I was like, yeah. I was like, you bought it for me like just a few weeks ago. He was like, I did? And I was like, yeah, you don't remember? And apparently he didn't remember. He just remembered me really wanting this book, but he didn't remember that he like bought it for me already. And so instead of returning it, I was like, oh my gosh, you just gave me the best anniversary present ever. I was like, because now we could read it together. And he was like, I'd read it. And I was like, really? You'll read the book with me? I was so excited because I was like, it's like a book club. And the book's about a book club. So I thought it was really, really funny. And so that's when we decided to read a book together. And now we're on our second book to read together. We just haven't found time to read, just because we could really only read together at night. And at night, it's like, we want to watch a movie and cuddle and go to bed. Like, we don't want to like read a book. Now, let's get to the good stuff, right? Just hit my face. The Southern Book Club's Guide. See, I still can't say it, and I'm looking at the title. It's like a tongue twister. The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. Try to say that 5 times fast in a row. So I hope you enjoy, and let's chat about this book. First of all, I love the setting. I love that it is about a book club and how they're kind of banding together to figure out this whole thing with why are these kids being harmed. And gosh, there's just so much to talk about with this. But, okay, I'm just going to go through all the places I highlighted in the book and share with you my favorite parts. So, once again, if you have not read this and you don't want to have spoilers, you can end the video now, maybe. So, but on page 20, they're at their book club meeting, and apparently no one read the book, right? And then she says to one girl, she's like, well, where did you stop reading? And then the main character, Patricia, says, the first page? I thought that was funny. So another thing that I noticed very, very early on in this book was the marriage between Patricia and Carter didn't seem to be that great. And the first indicator that I saw was on page 42. It says Carter gave her new earrings. And she said, Carter usually gives me something that he bought at the drugstore. But this year he got her pearl studs. But I believe we find out later that those pearl studs aren't like real. Something like that. So it's kind of like, right then and there, it's like, oh, like, okay, him not getting her presents, it's like, okay, but it's like, she wanted him to give her gifts because she was so shocked that he bought her earrings. She's like, oh my gosh, like he usually just buys me something at the drugstore. Like, this is so nice. Okay, another thing, the beginning of chapter 3, one of the book club members says, being a teenager isn't a number, it's the age when you stop liking them. That's funny. I just like those kind of little, like, one-liners. There's a lot of them. So they're talking about this van that they see. And a lot of the ladies are kind of, they're watching out for their neighborhood. And so a couple of the people say, oh yeah, I saw this like random white van parked in the neighborhood. So I like took down the license plate number. And then that's when someone's like, oh, I know who that is. It is the person that lives here. It's their nephew. That's their van. It's so that's how they find out. There's a guy that came into town to take care of his, I think his aunt. Yeah, to take care of his aunt who isn't doing too well. And that is our first introduction to this new character. So I remember thinking, oh my gosh, is this the vampire? Oh, yep, here we are. Remember how I told you Carter he bought her earrings for her birthday? Yeah, go ahead and read that. The thing in green. One of my patients sells costume jewelry. Okay, so there's a section where this, like, the aunt that's not doing well, she, like, comes out of nowhere when Patricia's taking trash outside, and she, like, bites Patricia's ear. And so there's another section where James, which is the nephew, he apologizes. I'm really sorry about, I'm like really sorry about your ear. And Patricia says, well, I suppose that's why I've got two. And this is where, so here we're 75 pages in. And this is where I'm kind of starting to like the relationship between James and Patricia way more than I like her with Carter. Like, at this point, I'm like, dude, Carter sucks. Like, he doesn't seem like a good person for Patricia. But then you're like, but is James the vampire? Do I want her to be with the vampire? It worked out in Twilight. So, oh, this was my first clue. Page 75, highlighted in green. She invites him inside the house. Like, isn't that, vampires need to be invited inside. Like, that's just like what all the folklore is, right? Like, a vampire can't come inside unless they're invited. Like, I just think of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like, in that show, like her inviting Angel inside and whatever. So when I read this, I was like, James, he's totally the vampire. James says, a reader lives many lives. The person who doesn't read lives but one. So I like that because it's so true. When you read a book, you really are transported into like someone else's life, especially if you put yourself in the shoes of the main character. I just love that books can teach you so much. Like, it's an adventure. And I think it's a lot different than just watching a movie, because when you're reading a book, you got to almost, set the stage yourself. You're imagining this world that you're in. So I think it's a lot different. And yes, you get to live many lives that way and live in other people's shoes. So I love books. And I love that statement. I forgot about this scene. If you don't like rats, maybe skip chapter 12. Yeah. Trust me. That chapter was insane. I think it was kind of the first glimpse you get into what this book is going to be like. Chapter 12. That's this far into the book. Like, at that point, you're probably dedicated. You're 130 pages in about when we get to this crazy scene. Basically, I think James controlled the rats or something, and they took over Patricia's house. Now, Patricia's not there. None of her family's there. It was just her mother-in-law and the caretaker. And just imagine rats everywhere, climbing on you, biting you. Like, the caretaker, I remember she, like, dove into the bathroom to get away, and the rats just devoured the mother-in-law, like, because she knew what was up. She saw James and was like, I have a photograph of you from whatever, when she was a little girl, and he looked the same. So that was my second indicator that, like, okay, James is totally the vampire. Like, he has to be. Another thing, reading this book, one of the main characters is Mrs. Green, and she, I believe, is like a housekeeper, and she lives in this different part of town. I think it's a like less affluent part of town. And she is saying a bunch of kids have been going missing from her neighborhood. And she says since May, we've had 2 little boys turn up dead and Francine is gone missing. And so I'm thinking since May, so I'm like, okay, at this point we are in June. This is June 1993. So I go back to the very beginning of the, well, that's too far back. Okay, I go back. Aha. The book kind of starts in May 1993. Okay, indicator 3, all these kids go missing since May, and that is when James Harris turned up in their neighborhood. Okay. Number 3. 3 reasons why James is probably the vampire. Let's keep investigating. Okay, so let's fast forward. We are now in chapter 21. Okay, so this is where Patricia is pretty certain that James is up to no good at this point. She's gathered all this evidence and she has this gut feeling, right? I'm sure some of us know, you just have this gut feeling like, oh, something's not right with this person, or like you just don't trust someone and you just can't explain why, but you're like, I have this feeling. Anyway, so this is what Patricia's going through. She decides to bring it up to her, the women bring it up at their book club meeting and their husbands are there. And this scene was just, it kind of irritated me because, the women are they're kind of coming to their husbands for help and saying, James, like, we have these suspicions, like, we want you to be careful. We want you to I don't know, figure out what's going on. Like, these are our concerns. And I just remember all the men in this book, all the husbands of these book club member wives, they just totally started gaslighting them, telling them that they were crazy and making things up and being delusional and stuff like that, to the point where all the women kind of started to cower and like, oh yeah, you're right, come on. And then they're like, Patricia, come on, like, this is James Harris, like he comes to our book club meetings, he's this great guy, he's investing all this money to help our like families, blah blah blah, all this stuff, to the point where Patricia felt like a crazy person because of what she was thinking, and to the point where I think at this point in the book, we are halfway through, and all of a sudden Patricia says, you're right, I'm crazy. I don't know why I'm thinking about this stuff. I think I'm reading too many true crime novels. You're right. And she decides to drop it because everyone seriously made her out like she was a crazy person. And so that just really bothered me, that all the husbands just like had no faith in their wives, and they're like, oh, James is our boy, like he wouldn't be like that. And so that was just like really sad to read about. And just, at that point too, you're just like, now I really hate Carter. And you're like, maybe James is a vampire, but he's a good vampire. So yeah, there's this little paragraph explaining how Patricia felt in that moment when everyone was telling her that she's like crazy. Patricia thought she knitted a sweater, but all she held in her hands was a pile of yarn, and everyone was laughing at her, patting her on the head, chuckling at her childness. She wanted to panic. So that part just gets me. It still gets me, because I'm like, why don't you believe her? Like, Carter could have definitely gone about it a different way. So I think that's especially why I was disappointed, because wrong approach, dude. So at that point, we're this far into the book, and we jump forward like 3 years or something. And at this point, I stopped marking a lot of stuff. That always happens. I always mark a bunch of stuff in the beginning of the book, and then we get towards the end and I don't tab anything. And I think that is because in the beginning, there's just so many lines that are foreshadowing or setting things up. And so when you get to like the end of the book, you're like just finding out things. You're finding out the truths. And at that point, I just like, I want to read. I want to finish it. That I don't really take as much time to stop and think. Because I just want the answers at that point, right? Oh my gosh. Just this book is just so crazy. Especially once you pass the halfway point, there's so many points where it's just like, like you find out all this stuff. I don't have much tabs left, but let me tell you the memorable parts, the more memorable parts of the story to me. Okay, so at this point, 3 years later, she drops it. James Harris has been their friend. He hangs out with all the book club members. He is invested in a property with all of them. And Patricia just kind of forgets everything she heard. And then I don't remember exactly what happens, but it gets brought up again where James is just, something's not right with him, that he is doing something bad. And this makes Patricia want to investigate him. And there's this one scene where she decides that she's going to break into James's house and have a look-see around. So when I was reading this with Daniel, he was very tired and didn't feel like reading. So I was reading out loud and he was just listening. But lucky for him, he fell asleep before the crazy stuff happened. And like he probably would have had nightmares if he heard what I was reading. But at that point, I didn't want to stop because I was like, this is crazy insane. How can I stop here and go to bed? So I just kept reading, and I told him the next day what I read, and he was like, I'm really glad I fell asleep. So he still doesn't know to this day, this whole scene. I want to lay it out for you. So maybe this is like preparation for when you read it, because I was shocked when I was reading it. It just grossed me out so much. I think because I absolutely hate bugs. I hate bugs. Okay, so Patricia sneaks into his house. Okay, and she goes up to the basement. She finds a suitcase that has a dead body in it. So that was right there. That is her proof that she's like, I am not crazy. He killed this woman like a while ago. So she knows. At that point, she's like, I know I'm not crazy. She got the proof she needed. Now, at that point, James unexpectedly comes back home. So she's up in the, did I say basement? Because she's in the attic. She's up in the attic and James comes home. And so she has to hide. And so she dives into this pile of boxes and clothes just covered in cobwebs and dust and totally gross. She gets under it all and has to lay perfectly still. And of course, James comes upstairs and he's standing in the attic and he is waiting for her to move. He like knows that she's up there. He's pretty certain she's up there. And then there's a scene where she's there hiding under all the stuff. And she's there for hours, by the way. Like, because James is home and just waiting for her to, I guess, make a mistake and make herself known. And there's a scene, but she's up there in the attic. And a cockroach climbs in her ear and is like digging into her ear. Oh. And it's very descriptive. And it grosses me out so much. Ugh. Okay, so the cockroach is in her ear, but James is right there. So she's like, do I freak out because of this cockroach and reveal myself to James, who will probably kill me? Or do I just let this cockroach do its thing? Which she did. She was like, okay, I have to stay still. I can't imagine a bug crawling in your ear and you just have to just let it. I can't even. No. Okay. Anyway. And then I think James leaves the attic, but she's still up there. And there's like something where she like started moving her jaw around to squish the cockroach in her ear. Ugh. Like, get the cockroach out. Anyway, she's in utter shock. And she's just up there for hours. Luckily, someone comes to kind of rescue her. One of her friends shows up. And Patricia is able to show her the suitcase. And at that point, she's not alone anymore. Like, she has other people who have now seen evidence. And they grab the license and they're going to hide it in his wallet or in his house or something for the police to find. And so they're leaving. They're like, oh, we have to get out of the house really fast before James comes home. Until they realize, oh my gosh, we left this on the white carpet. There's just like dirt footsteps going all the way up to the attic. And that's going to show James, hey, people know that there's a body in the attic. Then he's going to get rid of the body. And then their evidence is gone, right? So they're like, we have to clean the house before we go. And so it's just like, no, are you kidding? But it's like, they have to. Otherwise, he's going to move the body. And so that was a stressful scene because then it's them just like cleaning the white carpet, trying to, and then they're running out the door and you hear like the lock click open. And it's like, and then she looks back and there's paper towels sitting on the stairs. She like has to run and dash and like grab the paper towels and then like run outside before he gets in. And like, luckily they made it. But oh my gosh. And then I was like, well, now I have to go to sleep. I was like, I can't read more because Daniel fell asleep. I don't want him to miss like all this. So I think I had to switch books at that point and read something else until I fell asleep. That was a crazy scene. Like that whole I think that was the wildest part of the book. Like, even more so than the rats. For sure. Oh. So then at this point, like, the book club members, they're all certain that they know what's up. And they are not going to bring the husbands in this time because they know that the husbands are not on their side. And so all these women come up with an elaborate plan to catch James. And that scene too. Okay, I guess there's a lot more scenes in this book that like, this is why it's a horror novel, because it's pretty like graphic, I guess. But they have this whole plan to where, you know, Patricia's gonna let James suck her blood, but the other women are gonna catch him in the act, which they do. And I'm pretty sure, I just remember when I was reading it, I was just like, what's happening? I think like the women literally chop him up into pieces. Like, it's like, this is definitely a crime, because it's like, but at this point, you know, the women are like, we have to murder James because he's hurting our children. Like, and, you know, they wish that they had listened to Miss Green before, but it wasn't until their own kids started being affected that's when they were like, oh my gosh, we have to do something. So that's kind of sad that they, like, that's sad for Miss Green and her neighbors. But, like, at this point, the women are like, we need to do something because, like, if we don't kill James Harris, he's going to kill our children. And then he'll just move on and kill other people's children. And it'll be this never-ending thing. So they're like, we have to get rid of him. And so I just read that whole chapter of them getting rid of him was so graphic. And you're just like, okay. That's all I have to say for that. Like, it was a shocking ending, but it was a very interesting book. I enjoyed it a lot. So this story was pretty interesting. It wasn't scary, but I would say it's more gory than scary. So beware of that if you want to read this. And, you know, maybe past some certain chapters if you don't like rats or cockroaches or blood, you know, like, yeah, so I'm looking forward to reading some more books by this author. Daniel and I actually started reading Horror Store together, but we've only read a chapter and it's been like a month now, so we'll see if we can keep reading that one. I recommend this one, so just beware. But I recommend it. So thank you so much for watching this video. I know I spoiled a lot of the book, but I love watching videos where people talk in detail about what happens in the book because, you know, like, I forget, like, already I finished this book of like a month or two ago and I forgot a lot of what happened until I went through it and like read my, where I tabbed and stuff, and then I got reminded of the book. So I love videos like this where people talk about what happens in the book and like specific scenes in the book and like their thought process throughout reading the book. Anyway, so I love videos like this, so I wanted to try making one. And now in the future, when I want to remember my thoughts about this book, I'll just come back and watch this video, which I think is really cool because it's like a reading journal for me, but in video form. So I love that. And I also really would love to hear your opinions about this book, what you thought reading it, how the rat scene and the cockroach scene and like the chopping scene all made you feel, like what you thought. Did you think James was a bad guy? Are you on, you know, Team James, Team Carter, or Team None? Like, let me know. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video. Bye.